Hi, welcome to Time to Write. I'm Emily,
And I'm Amy.
and today we're going to talk about what happens when you get triggered in your writing community. Okay, let's jump into our
Great.
topic.
Okay, so we are talking about when we get triggered in the writing community, because I think it is a little bit different than being triggered in kind of real life, everyday situations.
Right.
So let's
Uh,
dive in.
yeah, and for those of you who aren't sure, like I can think of a couple examples. Like one is being at a conference and telling someone, that and this is before Lifestyles came out, when I was still kind of querying it, I'd written a, retelling of a Greek myth with a reality TV setting, and having someone say like, "Oh my God, I hate reality TV. Like, why would you do that?" It's go like, okay.
Yeah.
Or like, I didn't think anybody was buying my A.
Yeah, that, or I can even remember when I was still teaching, I took a writing class as part of my continuing ed. And yeah, I was very sure, and I still kind of am, that the teacher didn't quote unquote like me. And I was
Yeah.
like, it was a good experience as a teacher to know what
Right.
that feels like on the other side.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it just kind of froze me, like paralyzed me.
Yeah. And it can really, I think one of the things to know is when, as for us as writers, even if you are someone who has managed really well in other settings, it
Hmm.
can feel really overwhelming, especially the first time that, or if you bump up against someone who's like actively mean, which sometimes you will find, like people who are like,
Oh my gosh. Like I can remember, I think the last time I went to our local, well, several years ago, went to our local writers conference with a former member of our critique group who writes beautifully. And she so vulnerably signed up for a session where like you read your work and around a table, and there are people in the room, like surrounding the table listening. And the guy just shredded her. And it was very clearly his issues and his snark. And it was just horrible,
right.
horrible, and had
Yeah.
nothing to do with her writing
Right.
at all.
And so for us, like these are, if you haven't had this happen, like it just probably something will happen. And so for what we are going to talk about today isn't so much that other person and why they did what they did or anything like that, because that is, as we all know, a rabbit hole. It's also the rabbit hole that fiction comes out of. But for today, we're going to talk about what you can do in the moment if that specific thing hit, because there's some stuff people will say and it will just glance off at you. You will not care. But when someone's dart, either accidentally or on purpose, hits home in the middle of your insecurities, that for me is when I get super triggered. And I either like feel really bad about myself or I want to argue with that person. Both of which we
Right.
want to say,
Well, and let's talk about what we mean by triggered really quickly,
yeah,
because I think it's that whole fight, flight, freeze. And I think they've added fawn to it, which I
right,
think is totally a great addition,
right,
because I think that happens sometimes too. So it's that place where kind of the prefrontal cortex completely goes offline and you're all in your amygdala and
yeah. You
you're,
feel
yeah,
like someone like it. The thing to
attack.
remember about when our prefrontal cortex goes offline is that our nervous system doesn't know the difference between the guy with the monocle who just said something obnoxious about romance and a lion.
Hmm.
Like, because for early humans, social ostracization was a death sentence.
Right.
So for us, if somehow your brain has coded monocle man as someone who has power, and then he says romance is trash, your amygdala feels like you're being actually pelted with eggs
Hmm.
and driven, or tarred and feathered, whatever, driven out of town on a rail.
Right. Stoned, for sure. For sure. So, really, this is about managing ourselves when we're in that state. And I think a couple things, and you can jump in here too. I know for me, one of the things that I can do to get myself out is just like deep breaths. And for me, it's not about not being triggered. because I think that's just being a human.
Being a human.
It's about shortening that time between I'm triggered, I'm aware, and I'm trying to get myself out of it. How short can I get that little gap there?
Right.
How small can I get it? So it's like deep breathing. It's maybe
Noticing that it has happened.
noticing that it's happened, feeling all the like staying in my body. So it might be like bilateral stuff helps. So even if you like cross your arms and just kind of tap yourself where nobody notices, like just something to ground yourself in your body.
And I'll talk about this at the end. Rub 2 fingers
Oh,
together
yeah,
really
yeah, yeah.
carefully. Notice the color of the other person's eyes.
Yeah.
Anything, here's the thing, which I did not understand, but I'm sharing with everybody else. Anything that tells your body, oh no, this is not a lion. Because if it's really a lion, you do not have time to rub your fingers together.
Right.
If it's really a lion, you're running. So anything that gives your nervous system a chance to realize, like, oh, I do not have to grab a spear and fight this person off. I can sit in my body and like assess what's really happening.
Right.
Or I can leave and go to the bathroom. That's the other thing.
Right. And I think that's kind of our next point is you've got a decision to make. So are you going to stay in the conversation? Are you going to walk away? And either one is fine as long as you're still in your body, you've gotten yourself kind of calmed down and your nervous system calmed down.
And even if you're not fine, go to the bathroom, take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Like also still fine. We're all just humans. We're all just
right.
But
and the big thing I would say, if it's something that somebody has said, like, romance stinks or, whatever, like I'm can be a very argumentative person sometimes. I'm great at debating. And so squelching that and do not argue. Like there's nothing good that comes out of like arguing. And that's not saying you can't disagree with people on things, but in that moment when you've just been triggered, not a great idea.
Right. Well, especially because just getting your head around, and this is the thing we're sort of want you to understand, is you're in a writing, like this is the weirdest thing about this job. And I know it's true for actors and musicians too. It is our heart. It is our job. It is both things. So yes, protect your heart, but also this is our job. And so to, you would not throw a drink in the face of a coworker.
Right.
And these people that are our fellow members of the writing community, on some level, they are, for anybody who's ever worked in a job, they are our colleagues. And we all have the colleagues that we avoid at the water cooler. But when you need something done, you still have to hand something to them. And so sometimes the person that triggered you is just a fellow writer that writes Westerns and you're really never going to have to bump up against. But sometimes it's an editor, it's an agent, and while you can know, like, maybe I don't want this person to be my editor or agent, I would suggest that if you find someone consistently triggers you, maybe don't work with them. But the last thing I want to do is alienate them, because it is, people say this all the time, but this is just the truth. It is a tiny industry.
Yes. Tiny. And so you want to just kind of tuck them into your network, right? Like your list of people of, I met them, I know them, they could be a resource. Doesn't mean you have to work with them. You do have to be professional, right? So yes. So really in this, I think what's important is that we have to know ourselves and we have to know where our, vulnerable spots are, where insecurities are, where we're likely to be triggered, and understand that and know and that helps in recognizing it in the moment. Like, oh, they just said that about whatever, and okay.
And I would say it also finds it's super helpful because for some of us, we can't always tell the difference between, so I swing, and I think most people do this. I either swing from like immediately explaining like, oh, that person, they have their own baggage. They just put that out. That doesn't have anything to do with me. So swinging from that to like, oh, that totally hurt my feelings. I feel terrible. Right. Like, but being able to say sometimes people are being mean and you do not have to sit with that. You do not have to explain it. You do have to like not throw a drink in their face, but that doesn't mean you have to like stay in a situation or become really good. Worse and worse is when you see people, because there are some very unpleasant people in this community. And I have seen people who have explained themselves right up into a really close relationship with someone who is actively bad for you. That is not what Amy and I are talking about.
No.
We are talking about, I just had an interaction with someone. I am all over the map. Later on, being able to say, was that person speaking from ignorance? Was that person speaking from malice? Was that person? And once you're calmer, then you can actually assess it rationally and physically and emotionally and all the other things. Because you do also, I'm saying rational, but you also have to trust, like, if your rational mind is like, that person's fine, but your heart is like, I have a really bad feeling about this person. It is a small industry, but it's also a big world. You do not have to like be buddied up with someone that your body is like, no.
Right. For sure. And I think even if a person is unpleasant, going through that process of kind of reflecting on what is true and real here, what can I take from it if there's anything at all? Sometimes there's nothing at all.
Right.
Sometimes it's okay, even though that was mean-spirited, was there truth in it about my work? Is there something that I can, like flip it to being something that's a benefit to you?
Right. Like one of the things that I had forever with critique, and it still comes up sometimes, is readers would say, I can't connect with your main character. And they would say it in various ways, some meaner, some kinder. And over time, I just had to realize like, this is a growth opportunity in my work. But I really had to get over the part of me that's like, but I said it right here. But I said like, she's thinking this, like right here. And just being obviously for whatever reason, this isn't connecting with people. And so to figure out how to help with that, you do actually have to. So critique and meanness are not the same, although sometimes they feel the same.
Right.
They especially feel the same if you're getting someone like me who gets really enthusiastic in critique and sometimes doesn't notice that the other person is triggered and stop.
Which can happen.
And I think that's a personal flaw. I think that's a personal flaw, I will say.
No, I think that's something we all can, fall into. I think that's the other point to this, which is once you're aware of it in yourself, then you can see and recognize when you're the one, when the person across from you, and you can't control whether someone is triggered or not.
But you can at least notice that they are.
That you can notice that they are, and you can just stop, like change the conversation, like move along, whatever the case is.
So one of the ways that we would really recommend you sort of, as you look at a mindset on this, your mindset is, and we talk about this all the time, but just coming back to it, I can trust myself. I can trust myself. I can trust myself. I am not a like misbegotten being that needs to get trained. I can trust myself, but I do actually have to be like, pay attention, know myself. And so the practical that I would suggest is, so especially around your writing, and we'll talk about some ways to practice this, but there's an exercise. It's in a really great program called Positive Intelligence that it's a book I really like, but he talks about identifying your saboteurs, and a lot of this stuff is in there. But one of the things that he suggests is, when you get, he calls it being hijacked, but it's the same, all the same stuff. When you realize you were like off to the races, take a second, rub two fingers together, like as slowly as you can, so you can feel the ridges on each finger, or take a deep breath, or notice, but really notice your breathing, or see the color of the other person's eyes. So he has this really great exercise that I highly recommend, is the opposite of ruminating. Which the first time I did it, I was terrified because I have been known to ruminate. And I was like, oh, this is not good. It's that all, what's wrong with me? Why did I blah, 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 blah. That's not what we're doing. Call up a time when you were in a situation where maybe a writing situation, maybe something else where you got super triggered. You call it up in your mind. You're going to imagine yourself there. But in the moment, it's super meta. You're going to imagine yourself rubbing your fingers or feeling your feet on the ground, or you're going to imagine yourself settling. And then you're going to look at how would I have showed up in this interaction, settled, present, fully there. But you're actually doing it in your mind's eye. You are replaying, but you're replaying it embodied. And probably you'll see things that you didn't see before, and you'll see avenues. Because the thing about fight, flight, freeze, fawn is it only presents those avenues as your response. But when you show up fully, you can be like, oh, there's a million ways. Like, there's not only one way to manage these situations. There's a million ways.
Well, and that reminds me of something I wanted to say a minute ago, which is, I think that as you do that, it would be valuable to maybe think of 2 or 3 things that in the moment you can respond with that are neutral, that you know them already ahead of time. So you don't have to like try to dig them out of your brain when your brain is offline. Right. Things like, that's an interesting perspective, or just something neutral like that you can pull on and go to. Like, I never thought of it that way. Or, like,
there's no accounting for taste.
Right. Or like, wow, whatever it is, buys you time to continue to calm yourself. Yeah.
And so the thing also that Amy and I both really would recommend is also find somewhere an emotion wheel. This is going to help with your characters. It's also going to help with yourself. So when you're doing this replay, or when you're thinking about it, try to figure out what were the emotions that you were feeling. And maybe in the present, try to figure out what are the emotions you're feeling. What is it Brene Brown says? Just as most people only have angry and sad.
Right. Or angry, sad,
happy.
Right. Which that's what I was going to jump in and say. Her book, Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, is fantastic about really going through and giving you language around emotion. And then the emotion wheel that Em is talking about, you can just Google emotion wheel and find it. Wheel. And it is fantastic too.
Because a lot of times what you figure out is that, like, so let's say you're at a conference and someone says, this is an old reference, but you've written a vampire book and someone says vampires are over, to realize what you feel is sadness, not like, it feels like anger or denial or whatever else. And what you feel is sadness. And then you can actually ask yourself, like, is that really true? Because they sneak in lots of ways.
And does it matter? Like, speaking of vampire stuff, that reminds me, I can remember reading that Stephen King, like, totally dissed Stephanie Meyer's Twilight books, and just thinking, that's interesting, because, like, I'm sure she was crying about it all the way to the bank. Like, and so it was a kind of an icon in the writing space.
Right.
Yet I'm hoping that she was able to say, that's just his opinion. Right. I am doing a great job. There are people.
And also, it wasn't for Stephen King.
Yes. It's not for you.
That is the other. I'm sorry, just to really drill down on this. Sometimes you interact with someone and you realize they really have strong opinions. You didn't write it for them. They don't have to like it. I did not write a book about teenagers in the hyper realistic magical world because I cared what 65-year-old men thought about it. If they like it, great. But I wrote it for a very specific audience. So I don't really, that's next level.
For sure.
But to identify, like, and then sometimes you realize, like, I really, like, I feel bad that someone said something mean about my writing, because our writing is really serious and we put a lot of our heart into it. And honestly, guys, it's a little bit like people talking smack about your kids. Like, that upsetting.
Yeah. Right. Right. And I'm just going to throw this in here too. This all applies to social media as well. So when there are
100%.
trolls on social media, like move on, you do not respond, you walk away, you stay in your body, you do all the things that we just talked about. And you
Right.
on those, there's no reason to respond
no
to
arguing.
no arguing. No arguing.
Okay.
Okay.
And then we're almost out of time, but next steps, I'm going to say practice.
Yes.
Practice. And Amy has a tip about this, not with your
family, not with people that you don't want to start practicing with them because there's just a whole lot of emotional stuff going on there. Practice with your mailman and I love this idea from M as we were preparing.
So I am a person it's only been the last few years that I would have told you before the last few years that I never got triggered. I would have told you that. And what I have since discovered is, I did. And I got out of it so fast. I regularly had a thing happen where I would be, and that's our timer. I would be, let's say, working on my writing in a situation. And then I would realize I was at the grocery store.
Mm-hmm. Or in the kitchen with a cookie.
Or watching a movie and my family's like laughing their tails off because I'm like watching the movie from the other room. And so that's a good case. Like you're watching a show and all of a sudden you're just like, never have I ever. Cannot watch this. Cannot watch Never Have I Ever.
Oh, me neither. Cringy situations.
Social embarrassment.
Running. Yes.
Okay. That is a great opportunity, people. Take 2 seconds. Why is this fairly innocuous show, The Office, that people love, have me running out the door? Like, I can take a minute.
Yeah.
I can identify what are the feelings that Jim and Pam it was never Jim and Pam, but that Michael Scott is inspiring in me that is making me like literally like
flee,
run.
Yes. Same.
With the ice cream tub, running while eating the ice cream tub. Like, what's happening?
Right. So you're practicing in safe situations, right?
And sometimes you're practicing with the ice cream tub. That is the other crucial thing. Sometimes
but when you're holding the ice cream, that's a really great time. That's a really great signal to recognize like, totally triggered right now.
Yeah. Wonder what happened with the spirit of, and Amy put this in all caps in our Google Doc, curiosity.
Yeah.
Here's the biggest thing, people, and then we will go. If you come at yourself with anything approaching the what's wrong with you tone, you ensure that this just keeps happening. Because what you've told the part of yourself that's freaked out is, I heard this on a podcast the other day and I'm like, I want to save it, which is that we all have this core inside of us that just wants to feel okay. If you could imagine that core inside of you as a 3-year-old who is, as my current 12-year-old was as a 3-year-old, terrified of balloons. If I start screaming at the 3-year-old that he's an idiot for being terrified of balloons, like everything's going downhill. So he had a reason he was afraid of balloons because they pop and they make a loud sound and it was scary. Like, even though it was kind of funny that he was afraid of balloons, but it wasn't because he was really afraid. And so just being able to be like, I know you're really afraid. And we can look at the balloon and see it's just a balloon, but we don't have to touch it because I also know they feel weird. So in the same way to yourself, like if you could just, instead of being like, oh my God, why did I act that way at the conference? I'm such a moron. Just be like, why did I act that way at the conference? What did I think was happening?
Self-compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Or self-understanding. I like that one.
Compassion. I'm going to say compassion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going with compassion. So,
okay. What have you been
it all
reading?
makes us better writers, people.
For sure. Okay.
Amy, what's your high low?
So I would say my high is I'm continuing to work on my rom-com series and I'm diving a little bit deeper. So I've gone through and answered like 200 questions for 2 of the characters to kind of get, actually it's the 2 main characters of the first book. So I'm just enjoying that and enjoying doing all the kind of creative stuff I think you call it the paper doll phase.
I do call it the paper doll
So
phase.
I'm
That's
doing
what I
that.
call
I'm super excited because I totally created a whole Pinterest thing where it's like I have a board for every character and I'm starting to like populate it with, pictures
it.
of
Is
how I
that a
imagine
public
them.
board, Amy
It
Kelly?
certainly is. I'm under
And where would people go to find
that
your
would
Pinterest?
be on Pinterest. I'm the ish girl, TheIshGirl. So
Go check her out.
oh, you know what? I can throw it into our list of where you can find me. So,
Yeah.
and it's under the Green Firth Girls, which I have like a whole color palette, and then I did a color palette for all the sisters, and then all the significant others. I've done a color palette, so just super duper fun. So,
Yay!
yeah, and then I would say my low would be it's kind of nice that I'm kind of having to dig for it. Oh, here's Milo, because I'm here in Texas and it is like the armpit of hell. Like it is so hot here right now. It is mid-July. So like there's, we laughed when we first moved back to Texas. We lived in Virginia for about 10 years. And there's like the 3 months out of the year you can't go outside. There is like the winter. Here it's, it's like July through September.
September.
So anyway, so we're inside. So
Yeah.
that's me. What about you?
Okay, so my high is I went with my sister to Hot Springs, Arkansas. My sister and her husband and my husband and I went and did a little sisters and spouses getaway in Hot Springs, Arkansas, which is, people may know, I am just fascinated by the town. We went to the Gangster Museum. We did all kinds of fun stuff. And then my sister and I got our tarot cards read, which was a wild thing that I had never done. I'd gotten interested in tarot for some characters because I have a character I'm working on whose grandmother reads the tarot. And so I got interested in it. I have some cards, but having someone do it for me was really interesting. It was, and I did say like, I wanted to have her do it for my creative life. And so she was fascinating. And what she said, and I just think this is so interesting for our listeners, she just looked at me and she said, it feels to me like you're really going to be able to get rolling on this project around Halloween. But in the meantime, I think you should be resting and thinking and doing things that interest you
Wow.
and following your nose. And so I thought really hard about that. And I feel like I'm going to take her advice. So I will still be reading and researching and doing all the things. But she said, I feel like you probably have been on a productivity road for your whole life. And maybe it'd be good to figure out that you have value independent of that.
Okay, mind blown because we've literally been talking about that. Like
Yes.
that's what we've been talking about in our critique group. This idea that this in writing, the being productive is just getting the words on the page and not acknowledging that it's the thinking piece and the
sitting and the
sleep
being
and the sleep, right? Like the sleeping and you wake
sleeping,
up and then you're like fresh and you have all the ideas. So I
exercising. She
love
wants
that.
me to, she suggested I start dream journaling, which is a thing I've never been. She said, are you dreaming a lot lately? Which I've been dreaming. I don't always dream, but I've been dreaming like crazy lately. She's like, right. It's because your subconscious wants you to slow down and listen. So,
Okay. I love that.
I know. I thought that was really interesting.
Very.
And, I don't really have a low. Just things have been, yeah. I mean,
yeah. You're not going to grab the weather like I did.
Oh no, I mean the weather. Well, actually, our weather has been great, so I can't even complain.
It's kind of
great. It's supposed to be 100 on Wednesday, so I'm preemptively.
Well, and just saying, like, if you're having to like scramble for a load, like that's great. I hope everybody else is in that spot this week too.
Right. So. I would say I am a little tired of making food for people, and so I'm trying to figure out ways to make food for people in a way that doesn't feel quite so oppressive. So oppressive is too strong a word. You know what I mean?
No, I think oppressive totally fits. And anybody who knows me would agree like that's making food is oppressive. That's why my husband he grills like once a week and then we have easy meals other than that. Like it is not my thing. And now that our kids, well, my daughter's home for the summer, but he's a great cook. So yay.
Yeah. So
what have you been reading?
Oh my gosh. Okay. I have been reading. I have been having so much fun with the ongoing research for my book set in the 1920s. So I have been reading just read a biography of Zelda Fitzgerald. And now I'm reading a book by John Dos Passos, who I've never read before. That's a memory of his time in the 20s. And I'm just having a ball. What's so interesting about these people is it's really interesting, again, getting to our stuff, how much they don't say. Like, there was a line where in this book where this guy, John Dos Passos, is just moving from place to place to place. And he says, oh, hold on, I'm going to call it up because I just like, oh my gosh, this is so great. Well, I can't find it. He says, all the girls who were interested in psychoanalysis kept asking me, what are you running from? But he doesn't answer the question because it's really a fair question.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you realize at the end of his life, which is when he wrote it, I don't know that he knew. And that, to me, is like this beautiful writing. And yet there's this thing, again, not connecting with the main character. You see him he's traveling he was on a camel caravan at one point across, trying to get to Persia, like from Persia to Baghdad. He meets Gertrude Bell. He's on a camel caravan, but he doesn't know the answer to the question. And I'm like, that is interesting to me which is so interesting reading the book. And I can feel like how beautiful it is, but also I'm like, there's a
missing piece,
which totally made me think about can't connect with the main character, which nobody says that about Ariadne, by the way. But and about like, that the character doesn't have to know, but I think it's kind of useful if we, the author, know.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
What about you? What are you reading?
So kind of the same thing where I'm kind of researching. So my main female character in my first book is obsessed with Eleanor Roosevelt. So I've been kind of going back and looking. I haven't read like all, from start to finish anything, but I've been kind of dipping in. And there's one book in particular that Eleanor Roosevelt wrote an advice column. So she has all kinds of stuff to say about everything. And so that's been super fun to dive into.
Cool.
So yeah, just the whole research part of thing. This is my jam for sure. Yeah. For sure. Okay, friends, thanks for hanging out and make time to write.
Make time to write.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Oh, Patreon. We have a Patreon.
We have a Patreon.
Oh yeah. Let's tell them about the Q&A.
We're going to start doing a Q&A on our Patreon. So if you have questions for us, join our Patreon and send them, and then we will do a live Q&A
once a month at least once a month starting now. And yeah, we'd love to connect.
And we'd love to hear your questions and, try to answer them to the best of our ability, and also just meet you. Love to meet our listeners. So
for sure. All right. Thanks everyone.
Bye people.
Thanks so much for being with us today.
We love our people and we want to get to know you better.
So email us at questions@timetowritepodcast.com to have your questions considered for the show.
You can also suggest topics by emailing us there.
Also, drop us a review on Apple Podcasts. Not only will it thrill us,
seriously, we read everyone.
It also helps others find the show.
We're driven by sharing stories, and your review helps us do that.
Just remember, your stories matter, and we're rooting for you to find time to write.
Even if it's only 5 minutes. 5 minutes, you can do it.
You can do it.